So we're going to look today at the fourth book of the World Harmonics, which Kepler subtitles The Effect of Stellar Rays on Natural Phenomenon on Earth. The effect of stellar rays of natural phenomenon on Earth. And it is a book about cosmic radiation. You could subtitle the discussion, Does the Earth Have a Soul? Which is not particularly obvious. Some people here might say yes, some say, oh, that's absurd. What Kepler makes a couple of very sharp points in the course of the book. And what he says is that there is a primacy in terms of everything that happens on Earth with, from the standpoint of cosmic radiation impacting the Earth. So what you have a picture is of the Earth in the galaxy, in the universe, bathed in stellar rays, or what we would call cosmic radiation. So natural phenomenon, what men and women do, are all impacted, not by what happens on Earth, but what happens in the universe as a whole. So, in reading it, it is eerily on the mark in terms of Lynn's polemic over the last 9 months or so. There's a certain twist in the way he develops this idea of cosmic radiation. In that, basically, what he says is that the cosmic radiation, the stellar rays, have a harmonic impact on the Earth. And the harmonic impact, harmony, of course, is only proportion. It's the relation between one entity and another. So it's an entity of reason. So the stellar rays impacting the Earth create a certain harmony in the directionality by which they impact the Earth. We'll see this in a few minutes. And this is an entity of reason. And in turn, the harmonic nature of the impacting of the Earth by these stellar rays impacts a metaphysical or spiritual quality of the Earth, which he calls the soul of the Earth, or the sublunary soul. And the sublunary soul, in turn, acts on itself and creates upheavals in the forms of clouds, weather, earthquakes, volcanoes. So it's not that radiation is coming in and it's making the mountains jittery and they belch up lava. But there's an intermediary step, there's a twist, which is that the harmonic nature of the physical impact of the universe on Earth, in the form of, we'll go through it, how the rays hit the Earth, impact the spiritual quality, the soul of the Earth, and by agitating, inspiring the soul of the Earth, in turn, the organs of the Earth are agitated in the form of natural phenomena. So this he established is, basically he goes at this from a whole series of different angles in the course of the entire book. The second thing that he takes up, which I found eerily identical to what Lynn is bringing up, is he makes the distinction between the physical brain and the completely immaterial mind. How Lynn has been talking again and again especially over the last year, that the mind is not the brain. The brain is something physical. The senses are extensions of the brain. But what goes on in what the mind is something completely immaterial and spiritual and not physical. So then the question comes up, if we have all these senses which are impacting us through our body, touch, sight, smell, etc., and these are communicating something or other, whatever it is, to the brain, we're in the physical domain. But then this physical array creates something in the mind. which is not physical. It's immaterial. It has no weight. It has no extension. It has no feel. It has no touch. So how is it possible that something purely physical is able to create something completely spiritual? Take a mundane example. You go on a trip, you climb a mountain, and you look out at the vista, and it's sun setting. And the beauty and the vastness enters your eyes and ears and nose and forms certain physical impressions. But what does the mind see? The mind is lifted up. The mind is inspired. Think of poems of Keats or Shelley, where you could see, Shelley was Keats was a trained doctor. Shelley was clearly a student of botany and nature. Their poetry is suffused with an amazing analytical attention to detail in terms of the physical universe. So there you are, you've taken a trip, you're on a mountaintop, you're seeing this vast array, and what happens? Your heart lifts up. Your mind is activated. Well, how did that happen? How did you go from pink, orange, yellow sunset to a moral uplifting of the soul and a sense of the infinite? Not an obvious question. But Kepler, who I think is just tremendously courageous, takes up this question on what is the relationship between the physical brain and the mind. Now,
does he do it in those terms?
How do you mean?
The brain and the mind.
No, we'll see. He does it in terms of the sensations of the eye, and he goes through it, we'll read it, a detailed discussion about how the visual world impacts the optical nerve. And he obviously was a student of anatomy. You'll see he goes through an amazing discussion of rays of light coming into the eye, what it goes through, impacting the optic nerve, and then creating an image in the mind. So he contrasts the mind and the physical. He doesn't say brain, but the sensory apparatus, the five senses. And he says it in a certain way. This is really tough. This is really tough to explain. But he says, look, laziness in philosophy is death. So roll up your sleeves and get ready and let's figure it out. And then he goes through an amazing explanation, which we won't go through here, which I think I included in the handout people can read. Now, take something Lynn's been talking about a lot over the last many years. He again and again is talking about the way in which a revolutionary scientist comes up with a new conception never before formulated by paradoxical inputs from opposing senses. And he says the perfect example of this is Kepler, the opposing sense of sight and sound. Right? Everybody remember Lynn saying this again and again? Again and again and again and again? Mm-hmm. Now I find this interesting because we're talking about, so he's saying that Kepler made discoveries about how the planets work, how the universe functions, through two senses of sight and senses of sound. But wait a second, I don't get it. If you go out on a clear night and lie on your back and identify a planet and just lay there and watch for 6 hours, and those of you who are astronomers like Roger or have done this, what, in terms of Mars, what do you see? What do you actually see? Let's say you're up there for 6 hours, from midnight to 6 a.m.
Continuously? Continuously?
Yeah, so, or not, or
I've done it over 8 hours, and
yeah. And what do you see?
You do see movement if you leave and come back within that time.
Right.
But basically everything moves.
Everything moves.
But if you're watching it, you don't see it.
If you're just continuously, you wouldn't see hardly anything.
And what you do see is maybe a planet goes like this. Maybe you see it move, I don't know, 2 degrees.
The planet, you might not even see that move, but you see everything
You'll
move.
see the
Yeah.
position at a different night related to the stars. You would see it in a different position at a different night related to the stars.
No, but at one,
Background, but on one night.
But well, I mean,
you'd
but
see it.
Lynn, I'm saying, let's take Lynn
Generally
serious.
nothing.
Let's take Lynn at his word. He's making such a big deal about this. He says Kepler had one set of sensory inputs, which was sight, and another set of sensory inputs, which are sound. And the two contradicted each other, and Kepler was able to synthesize something unseen, the cause, i.e. universal gravitation. Now, when we were all kids in school, what were we told gravitation was? Well, if you take a tennis ball and you wrap a string around it, and on the string you make 3 feet and you go like this. And then we were told that there are two forces opposing each other. One is a centrifugal force in which the tennis ball wants to go away. And the other is centripetal force, remember this?
Yes.
Which is pulling the tennis ball in. So there are two forces fighting each other. And these two linear forces fighting each other creates the orbit of the ball. Right? Remember that in school? Okay. No? Okay. Well, you were in the bathroom smoking that thing. So,
Had mumps that day.
I'm sorry, it was centrifugal versus what was the other?
Centripetal.
yeah, centrifugal and centripetal. And then we were told that's how the planets work. They're going around and they're going around, and if there wasn't this big sun pulling it in, they would just fly off the handle. On the other hand, they have a certain impulse somehow or other to keep going around, and they keep wanting to go out, away. But the sun keeps pulling them in because it's so big and such a macho. And that's what the orbits are. I remember being taught that. It's absurd, completely absurd. And we were told that this model that I just described is called what? Gravity.
What happened to the apple? I thought that was gravity.
That too. This is on a cosmic. I mean, that's as absurd, obviously, as
That's what I
absurd.
remember.
What Lynn is saying, however, is that the solar system is defined by universal gravitation, which is geometric, which is harmonic, and that the geometry of the solar system is defined by certain universal harmonic laws. Turns out those laws are the same from the standpoint of music, and the same from the standpoint of visual space, as we see in classical art. So there are two ideas of gravity. One, which we were taught, completely mechanistic and soulless, and the other thing which Linden is alleging. Again, I'm saying this is what Linden alleges. Linden alleges that here's the contradiction. Sight and sound, it's a contradiction. Kepler comes up with a new conception, never before thought of, which Lind defines as universal gravitation. Now I'm saying people should think this through, because it's not obvious. If you're sitting there for 8 hours and watching Mars or Venus or whatever, and it goes beep, I mean, how do you get an ellipse out of that? How do you get an orbit out of that? Or what about the nested polygons? Do you see a cube? Do you see an icosahedron? I mean, Kepler was saying there's an icosahedron, right? That sticks there and it divides the certain planets. Where is it? Is it there, or is this a hoax? Where is the tetrahedron? Where is the cube? He's defining that. He's saying that this is what you see. Well, all right. That's one. I put that question aside. Okay, that's one question we should answer. Let's try to answer another question. Then he says that we have a certain idea of how the planets are arranged by sight, and then we have another set of inputs by sound. Now, if you go out at like 4 in the morning, go to a mountaintop, and it's really quiet, really, really quiet, and you listen for the movement of the planets very hard, what do you hear?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Crickets.
Crickets. That's it, crickets, exactly. You hear the crickets. Which doesn't tell you much about Pluto. Now, I don't think I'm giving away the end of the ghost story to say that in about 6 or 8 months from now, when we finish book 5, we'll see that there are certain relations in the motion between each of the planets to each other, and each of the planets among their varying velocities, and that the relations between the velocities of the planets, one to another, and each to themselves within their fastest motion and slowest motion, are harmonic. Harmonic. They reflect the musical scale. So Lynn is saying that there's a certain picture of the solar system which you hear, which Kepler heard, and another set of data which is seen. But I pose to us, that's interesting, because if you go out and try to see the ellipse, you can't find it. And if you go out and you try to hear the motions of the planets, you can't hear it. So the question becomes, what the hell is Lyndon talking about? Is this like absurd? Anybody have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've read parts of the New Astronomy, and I just think that what you're saying, he didn't do it by going out and looking one night for 6 hours at the planets moving.
True.
He had masses of Tycho Brahe numbers and, et cetera. I mean,
Mhm.
he did over a long period of time. So, that's what I was thinking when you were saying that. You don't just, what he did was much bigger than that. And in terms of the question of the sound, it's.
What is it that he saw? And and in what sense did he see?
He saw it.
You're right about the
He saw it
data.
in his mind. He saw it in his mind.
He saw it in his mind.
Yeah, and the same thing with the music. I mean, obviously you don't hear it, but you can see the harmony, like the, what we've done in the beginning, the proportions.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, you would apply that geometry to the music, to the harmony of the music, and you would hear that in your mind too.
So in each case, it's not what Lynn is talking about is not what's seen by the senses, but what's seen in the mind.
Right.
And what's heard is not heard
Right, it's in the mind.
by a piece of, as in the music, but it's heard in the mind.
Right.
And those two contrasting
Paradoxes, sure.
pictures forced a question, which then he resolves. That's the case.
Well, see, also, if you think of the visual construct of the nested solids, so there's it was in his mind, but he made it visible to people, right? So you have the nested solids, and you look at that as a visual representation of the ordering of the solar system. And then you have a different representation, which is the intervals in the music. I mean, it is two entirely different, constructs. It's interesting. It's two entirely different constructs,
But the geometry is the same.
Yeah.
The geometry is the same.
but when you how do you arrive at it? When you arrive at the nested solids, that's one.
That has certain proportion too. Which is
Well, obviously we know that because we know it after
No,
the
but I'm
fact, but
saying,
but
what he was doing, that's how he probably had like a eureka moment, because he's looking at this and it has certain proportions that you can say, oh, wait a minute, I've seen these before, and maybe I saw them in the music, why don't I test it out and see?
Well, what I have trouble with is understanding there's two realms here, the Satan and the sound, but where is the actual contradiction? Certainly there are two different ways of looking at the phenomenon, but what's actually contradictory or what's paradoxical? maybe I'm missing something obvious, but what is the actual paradox that such that he has to synthesize something?
Well, neither by themselves gives you the answer of the construction of the solar system as a whole. They're contradictory, not like black versus white, white versus black, but they're two completely different systems in terms of understanding what the engine is, what's working.
Well, the other thing to ask yourself that I've thought about is that you have those two elements. What makes each of them, while they're not precise, I think that was part of the contradiction. They weren't precise. They didn't solve the question, each of themselves. What makes them different than the three other guys, Copernicus, Bry, and Ptolemy, that it was a revolution in looking at the whole thing over what they were doing?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of contradictions, I mean,
Yeah. And in terms of a conception of what he called celestial physics.
Now, speaking of those three other guys, they all said that everything was spherical, right? And Kepler was he the first to say it was elliptical? And that's how he resolved a lot of that contradiction on both the sight and the sound, was with the elliptical, which was a total revolution from
that was the beginning.
spherical. Yeah.
That was the beginning.
But I think the real revolution was that Kepler saw that there was a lawfulness which could only explain one set of phenomena, where these guys had different measurements, which there was no law. Each one of them could be as valid as the other.
Well, they all work.
Question of cause.
Yeah, the causality is what
Question of cause.
Kepler.
But it is the case that the visual and the musical, they are two distinct. You have to reconcile them, which is a higher conception of memory. They're distinct, and they are just in the fact that they are two distinct, fully complete. I don't know what you want to call it, a schematic or a system or whatever.
well, it's
But
like being.
are they that distinct? Because
Yes, they are.
In a sense, because I'm thinking of different instruments photographing the sun. You have infrared, X-ray photographs. You have, the radio photographs of the sun or stars or whatever. And it's all different wavelengths of cosmic radiation. And each produces a different result, and this is one thing scientists are trying to correlate somehow.
I think you think about it differently. Think of it as like two things perceiving the same thing from 90 degrees. Even the color spectrum is along the same linear way of looking at it. Think about it as you're looking at something from within the plane of the Milky Way galaxy, and you're looking at it from above. Nobody has ever been above the Milky Way galaxy. Things are radically different at that point, such that you can't even actually say anything about it except what you can imagine.
Okay, we can come back to that, and people
Just
can
in terms of the paradox of sight and sound. That's all.
Okay, we can come back to that, and people obviously can discuss it later. In the course of the chapters in this book, Kepler says that there are two kinds of harmonic faculties in the universe. And he proceeds from the idea that the universe is defined by an underlying harmonic quality, that there is a world harmonics, if looked at in the appropriate way, found in every sphere. And I wrote this up here. He goes through in the beginning two different harmonic faculties of the soul. One he calls contemplative and the other operative. The contemplative faculty is that expressed in the human mind in terms of the harmonic qualities of abstract ideas, such as conceiving of a musical piece without hearing it. Or think of in chorus, it's time to start, and everybody has to start, each section has to hear their note in their mind before they make it. And they have to hear their note in relationship to the other three voices. So this would be an example of the harmonic faculty or capability, a contemplative aspect in abstract entities, that is, in the mind only. Then you have sensible things where you can perceive harmonies by heard harmonies, perceived harmonies. These are both forms of contemplative harmony, specifically characteristic of man. The same kind of harmonic faculty exists in the biosphere. We would call the biosphere in terms of plants, animals, etc. In fact, if you're a gardener, you know that certain plants express themselves in identical ways again and again and again. And there are very specific harmonic relations between the leaves. You take an apple, you cut it in half, not the normal way you do it, cut it in half this way, and what do you see? You see a pentagon. And you take a million aspects of the biosphere, you'll see that harmonic quality expressed. Well, this is an aspect of what Kepler calls the world soul, and it's a harmonic faculty within the natural world. So as Lynn has often emphasized, with man, reason is self-conscious and self-reflexive. In the universe, reason exists as powerfully, but without self-consciousness. And this is very much akin to Kepler's discussion of the kinds of harmonic faculties. It exists in the universe as a whole, in terms of the expression of the galaxies, or what he knew, the solar system, and the expression of natural phenomena. Now, he introduces an idea which he calls the sublunary soul. Sublunary, below the moon. And what he describes, what he says is, he says that the Earth as a whole, which we know as a physical entity, also has a soul. And just as the human soul, he says, where does the soul reside? Well, he said it resides in the heart. And the soul of the world, or the Earth's soul, he says, is diffused through the whole body of the Earth. So in an identical way that each of us has a soul, so the Earth has a soul. And what he says here, he says at a certain point, he says, for just as objects move the senses, sound the hearing and not the eyes, color the vision and not the hearing, similarly in this case also, a certain quality of this relation, which is called a configuration, moves not the bodily senses, but a spiritual faculty, capable of reason by instinct without contemplation. Now the configurations, we'll get to in a minute, are exemplified by this. That is, the way in which the stellar rays, or the light, from various planets, moon, sun, the configuration, geometrically, of how they hit the Earth, creates a certain excitation, and a transformative aspect, which impacts the sublunary soul, which then is manifested throughout the natural world. So again, he says, for just as objects move the senses, sound the hearing and not the eyes, color the vision and not hearing, similarly in this case also, a certain quality of this relation, which is called configuration, moves not the bodily senses, but a spiritual faculty capable of reason by instinct without contemplation. That is, reason by instinct in the earth, of the earth. Therefore, the configuration brings that about not by its own force, but by the force of the soul, which is said to be passive, although in actual fact it rather acts itself on itself. After that, the sublunary soul or nature, thus moved or stimulated by the aspect, these are also called aspects, after that, the sublunary soul or nature, thus moved or stimulated by the aspect and reminded of itself, stirs itself up to draw out from the bowels of the earth the material for every kind of weather. So what he says is this. In one of the chapters, he had a whole series of diagrams. I just reproduced the first three. Here's us on Earth. And here's, let's say, Mars, and maybe this is the moon. So he says that at opposition, when one of these bodies is 180 degrees opposite of the other, this has the most powerful aspect on the sublunary soul.
Wait, when what's at 180 degrees from each other?
Here's we on Earth. Okay, that's you. You are here. Here's Saturn.
Oh, okay.
Here's Mars.
Okay.
He says when they're in opposition or when they're together, the 180 degree relation has the most powerful impact or influence on the Earth. Hold on, let me go. Hold your question. Write down.
Planets or the moon?
Write down your questions. I want people to follow this. Hold on. So he said that this is the most powerful of impacts. Then secondarily, when the moon and the sun, let's say, are at a 90 degree aspect, this is the second degree of impact on Earth. Impact what? Weather, your mood, feelings, war, peace. The third level of impact and influence is, I guess he calls this triune, when the two heavenly bodies are at 180 degrees, forming an angle at the Earth.
120.
120, yeah. So he refers to this as the aspects or configuration from the Greek or from Arabic or whatever. Everybody still with me? We haven't lost anybody yet?
Not yet.
Okay, so hang in there. This is Kepler, so hang in there. I'm
not with you.
Okay.
Because first you said my question is, it could be any two bodies?
Yes.
All right. Because you had first said the moon and Mars, and then
That
you
was
said
an example.
Right. Then you said Saturn and Mars on the same one.
As an example.
So that's my question. It could be any two. It could
Yeah.
be the sun. It could be a planet. It could be.
The moon.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, he discusses this.
What about if you had two planets in the moon on 180? Does that ever
No,
happen?
no. Try to work on the concepts which are deep rather than the details.
Well, I'm just trying to see if there's a more deeper
Okay.
influence on the Earth. If
Fine.
you
Okay.
had two.
I stress, work on the concepts, not on the details. The import is not in the details. The import is on the conception that the Earth and all activity on Earth is a galactic phenomenon.
That was my question.
This is 400 years ago. You have to be a little bit open, not stiff. He says,
400 years ago, did they know that the moon reacted on tides on the Earth?
in fact, the person who first said that was Kepler.
Okay.
In the new astronomy, he discusses gravity, and he says that the motion of the oceans is defined by the magnetic pull of the moon. Now, what proof did he have of this?
The tides.
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit astounding. His conception of the relation, and this was like 80 years before Newton. So his conception of galactic activity and the way in which earthly phenomena are completely integrated with the universe as a whole, I mean, I find breathtaking. And we went through this when we read through the New Astronomy. He's very explicit about how the tides work and the moon and the magnetic pull between the Earth and the moon, and what the relationship between the big body of the Earth and the little body of the moon. It's quite visionary. So listen to this. He says, this is again on this question of, again, let everybody think about the Earth having a soul. I mean, most people would not have a problem here in saying that I have a soul, Pat has a soul, Star has a soul. We would not have a lot of arguments. But he's saying that in just the same way, the Earth has a soul. He says, the chief soul into which these harmonies of the radiations flow is that called by the philosophers the sublunary nature, diffused through the whole body of the Earth, our nurse, and rooted in some particular part of it, exactly as the human soul is in the heart. From it, as if from a hearth or a font or inner sanctum, it emerges by its emanation into the ocean, which surrounds the lands, and the air, which is over both. Now, a man who is listening to an agreeable song of a good singer, he bears witness to the delight in his own expression, in his voice, clapping of his hands and his feet, in time to the rhythm of melody that he perceives and approves the harmonic content of the melody heard. In exactly the same way, sublunary nature, by a remarkable and obvious commotion in the bowels of the earth, particularly on those days on which the wandering stars are in a harmonic configuration with their rays at the earth, bears witness to what we have already said by way of preface. That is to say, that it has just as much power of perceiving that is the soul of the earth, the harmonic proportions of the angles by a kind of natural instinct as it has of beating and agitating the body of the earth and the underground workshops in its mountainous regions at certain times of harmony by a natural faculty similar to our natural faculty, so that they, the earth, they exhale a great amount of vapor and clouds, from which through reciprocal production of cold on high, all kinds of occurrences in the sky are shaped. For this soul must be placed in the body of the earth, as the harmonic angles of the rays exist in no other part of the world but on earth, and the works of nature which follow upon the configurations of the rays take their origin from the bowels of the earth and the caverns of the mountains. Now, to illustrate it, here's what he's saying. He's saying that in the heavens, in our solar system, as he knew it, you have the sun and the stars and the physical bodies. These suns and the stars create certain configurations in the heavens with respect to us here on earth, right here. And that these aspects are harmonic. They have a very specific configuration. When they're in a certain harmonic relation, typical like this, there's a major effect. When they're a little bit off, no effect. So that the aspects are an aspect of harmony. That is, they're rational things. They're categories of the mind or the spirit. And that these aspects don't impact the lava in the volcano. They don't impact the motion of the ocean, but they impact the soul of the earth, the sublunary soul. And by the excitation of that sublunary soul, it in turn agitates its body, which are the volcanoes, the eruptions, the weather, etc. And he says at a certain point, he said, well, how did I come to this? This is not the kind of astrology that most of the astrologers put forward. most of the astrologers put forward is that there are gods up in the heavens, and the gods are sitting on the planets, and the gods, they have fights, and they make up, and there's all this motion between the gods, which are the planets, and that impacts the fate of us on Earth, us little people. He says, that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm saying that the universe, the substance of the universe, is a harmonic quality. And the harmonic quality exists as a unity between the macrocosm, the whole, and our activity here on Earth. And the mediation between the cosmos and the harmonic playing out of the cosmos and the Earth's activity is through this entities of reason, the soul of the Earth, and the aspects. Now, I'm not asking you to say, yeah, that's good, I believe that. I'm going to tell all my friends about this. That's not my point. What I'm hoping to do is give you an accurate picture of his view of how the universe functions and the way in which harmony is manifest in the universe. Here's what Peter Martinson, in the, remember that initial series on cosmic radiation 9 months ago or something like that? Peter has a lovely paper called Following the Beat of a Different Drummer. People can look it up. And here's how Pete describes it, which I think is on the mark. And it's a nice little summary. He says, Johannes Kepler assembled an exhaustive study of all of the constructible visual and auditory proportions in his World Harmonics of 1618. He put this work together after having followed up his initial study of the solar system, which he presented in the Mysterium Cosmographicum, after having with the identification of the key parameters of the planetary orbits by focusing on Mars and on the Earth. Kepler's goal right from the start, which he most fully expressed in the World Harmonics, was to show that the universe functions on the basis of pre-established harmony, and that it was composed with the mind of man in mind. In other words, man's mind can comprehend how and why the Creator created the universe in the way that it was, because the universe was designed to be thus comprehended. Kepler places the motive faculty within the powers of reason, which he doesn't bestow on any other organism but man and God. Man recognizes the proportionality, then decides on appropriate action. Since the other organisms also act according to reason, yet do not possess the faculty of reason in themselves, Kepler hypothesized an agent to mediate between them and God, and he called this the sublunary nature, or a soul for the Earth. Specifically, sublunary nature can perceive the apparent angles between the lines of sight to the other planets in the system, including the moon and the sun, and determine how to react to them. Kepler is careful to make clear that the perception itself is not what causes such reactions. In no way is the emanation from the sense object the direct cause of any action on any organism, including man. That action is on account of the perceived proportionality, which itself bears no motive, meaning physical force. Kepler discovered, based on knowable and constructible congruences between the plane figures, which angles, or what he called aspects, should be more or less influential on sublunary nature. For example, opposition and conjunction, 180 degrees, are the most influential, while one right angle between lines of sight will be somewhat less influential. Most of the apparent angles between any two bodies will not coincide with any influential aspects, which is why sublunary nature will ignore them. But When it perceives the passing of influential aspects, sublunary nature acts accordingly through its organs, including weather systems, volcanic and seismic activity, and tides, the living organisms. How's that?
Now, what you were quoting from was that Peter quoting
Peter.
Kepler, or was that Peter?
That's Peter describing Kepler.
What was the name of the paper?
That's a video.
Following the beat of a different drummer.
That was, yeah.
The extended
There
sensorium.
were a whole bunch of newspapers.
So you go.
Okay. So, let's see, people take a look, we're going to take a look a bit more at how these aspects work. People have the handout.
I don't, you have one there?
Can share. We can share.
People can share. Sharing is good.
Check your
So the
phone.
first, okay, so the first page should be page 358, is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to start at the bottom of 358, the last paragraph, and go around the room. The paragraph is starting, the view that there. Lance, you want to start? Speak loudly and clearly and slowly, please.
The view that there is some soul of the whole universe directing the motions of the stars, the generation of the elements, the conservation of living creatures and plants, and finally, the mutual sympathy of things above and below, is defended from the Pythagorean beliefs by Timaeus of Locri in Plato. Proclus, in fact, confirmed it in various places, including the words which I transcribed in chapter 1 of this book 4. They made it something different from the mind. Whereas the mind was simple, this soul was manifold in its faculties. And whereas the ideas of all sensible things were at first in the mind on their own account, pure and identical, they were in the soul secondarily, because of the mind, and taken from it, as they incline more towards matter. Hence, using the distinction between the names, they called those which were indeed intellectual or mental patterns, but those which were spiritual, the images of those patterns. What it amounts to is that a Christian can easily understand by the Platonic mind, God the Creator, and by the soul, the nature of things.
Connie, you want to continue?
By what winds of contemplation they were driven to arrive at these doctrines, I leave it to others to hammer out. I shall speak for myself, and first, indeed, on the soul of the whole universe, though I raise no opposition. Yet I shall say nothing in this book forward. For it seems that if there is some such thing, it resides in the center of the world, which for me is the sun. And from there it is propagated over the length and breadth of it by the agency of rays of light, which are equivalent to spirits in the animate body.
You want to continue, Christine?
About nature indeed, which directs the elements, although I call it by the customary epithet sublunary. I began 20 years ago now to reach not dissimilar conclusions. Indeed, I was moved to that, not by reading or admiration of the Platonists, but only and solely by observation of the weather and study of the aspects by which it is excited. Shall I continue?
Yeah, please.
For I saw that with great consistency, the state of the atmosphere was disturbed whenever planets were either in conjunction or configured in the aspects commonly spoken of by the astrologers. I saw that there was generally calm in the atmosphere if few or no aspects occurred, or if they were quickly completed or concluded. Indeed, I considered that this business should not be considered so lightly as the common herd of forecasters usually does.
Pat, you want to continue?
They portray the influences of the star. Oh, I just wanted to say one thing.
Yeah.
This, when the planets are in conjunction, it would be like, why don't you show them, just so they know what it means.
Yeah, if they were both here.
Yeah. So opposition on opposite sides.
Right.
They portray the influences of the stars as if they were some gods with power over heaven and earth, carrying out everything at will, totally untroubled by what means they produce any effect whatever among us on earth, since they themselves remain in the heaven and do not send down to us anything which is evident to the senses except the shining rays. This is the chief gush of the most horrible superstitions of the astrologers. Yet, I do not greatly wonder at the forecasters, a race of men which is generally suited to the popular taste, childish and given to dreaming. It is rather the well-known professors of philosophy who should be blamed, as although they have it from their own Aristotle that the life of animate beings and of plants is fostered by the virtue of the sun, they do not ponder the implication that the virtue of the sun is perceived by those creatures. Philosophy is altogether idle and dozy if it admits of the sun's acting on these lower regions, as a sculptor acts on inert matter, although the sun lacks chisels and burins and axes, and all corporeal instruments.
Hold on, so what he's saying is, he's saying the sun, he says the sun has a preeminent impact on Earth, but not merely a physical impact, the way a sculptor starts with a block and hammers away. It's not simply a physical relation, but it's mediated by a spiritual aspect. Okay, go ahead.
How much more wide awake than these philosophers is the poet Virgil, and how much wiser? For he does not ascribe everything even to the rain, which is nevertheless a part of matter itself, but compares the bosom of the earth to the thighs of a wife, and indeed a joyful wife. That is, one who perceives what is happening to her with pleasure and helps her husband with suitable motions. All these things are signs of life, and suppose a soul in the body which experiences them.
The soul of the earth.
Yep.
Okay.
For it would not be easy for the sun, destitute of suitable troops, to invade the citadel of the bowels of the earth without the cooperation of some kind of soul seated within, to collude with the enemy and open the gates to him. You may see many who in fact concede very little to astrology struggling through neglect of this consideration, as if through sloth. So much so indeed that when I appeared and demonstrated the means by which a change in the weather is the consequence of an aspect, there rose up a celebrated man who, in order to refute me, contended with great vehemence that the material of rain was heavenly, which we also ridiculed above on page 327 for the common herd. Yet he did not tell us, even in that case, on what basis it comes about that always when the rays of the planets meet at the earth, the rain falls if the rays of two planets make an angle of 60 degrees rather than if the angle is 59 degrees or 61 degrees.
Okay, that's accurate.
So where's the 60 degrees up there?
Well,
Would it be a hexagon?
Half of
Yeah, it is
one,
120, so it must be half of this.
So we must be at 60 degrees now,
The,
right?
you see, he goes through a long array. So this is what I have up there. Of different sets of aspects. They get intricate. And as he goes along, they're families of less and less influential impact. And he simply says many times, I didn't invent this. I watch the weather, I watch the heavens, and every time we get one of these, we get one of those. He says this again and again. He's very famous for having written Wallenstein asked Kepler to write a chart about his future. This is when Wallenstein was in the middle of the wars in Europe, and Kepler wrote a horoscope of what was going to happen over the next 20 years, and Kepler defined the month when something horrifically catastrophic would happen to Wallenstein, and that was the month he was killed.
Oh my God.
So you decide.
Because the other thing is, he's doing this from observation from one part of the earth. I mean, it's raining in one area, but another area it's sunny, so.
Well,
Yeah.
you don't, if you only have opposition, in other
That would
words,
be where you're standing.
yeah. In other words, if it's happening here, it's not happening in Argentina, right?
Well, what he says
I'm not
is
sure.
assume that the Earth is a point. So these oppositions or aspects occur wherever you are on the Earth.
Oh, well, that doesn't make sense then, because then it would be raining everywhere on the earth if it's at 60 degrees.
It does different things in different parts of the Earth.
Well, like, just as like now we had like all these rains, and then you have like dry in the west. So I'm not saying that's happening, but there might be that aspect thing going on now, right? I mean, because I
That's
didn't.
for you- that's
No,
for
the
you.
aspect stopped in 1600.
That's for
I'm
you.
talking
That's for you
about-
to decide.
That was analog, we're digital now.
But that could be. But I'm not observing it because I didn't even think about it till just now. But for people who do, they might have seen this too. I don't know.
See, the way I think of it, you have to decide. I mean, my purpose is to pose to you the questions
Right.
that Kepler is posing, not to
Say it's true.
tell you this is true or that's true.
Right.
You have to decide.
Something to think
I
about.
mean, what I'm shocked by is the accuracy 400 years ago of the idea that all of these terrestrial, seemingly mundane phenomena are galactically determined, and there's a physics to them, that it's not a bunch, as he said, it's not a bunch of gods being happy or sad, but there's, as he calls the beginning of the book, this is celestial physics, that this world is part of the world as a whole, and that the mind of man and the mind of God are congruent. Riemann much later makes the point that mind has no dimensions and no material substance. So therefore, mind doesn't exist anywhere in space. You may think that the mind is between your ears, but it's not true.
I just want to say something on that, because a number of years ago, I was reading the Discourse on Metaphysics.
By Leibniz.
Yeah. And I don't know whether he specifically addressed this, but somehow, something I read in there got me thinking about this question of the brain and the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually suddenly realized that there is no way that the human mind could be contained within this little gray matter in this head. And I said this to some people and they looked at me like I was crazy. But the thing that I was going to bring up about this, and you just sort of said it, is I thought to myself, and this is like something that is so unsettling to think about. It's almost as unsettling as trying to figure out where's the boundaries of the universe. You know?
Right.
Where is the mind?
Right.
Because it's not material.
Right.
So where is it?
It brings up the question of what do you mean by where? Right? I mean, that would be a legitimate question. Okay, where is the mind? That's a good question. What does one mean? I don't mean you. What does one mean by where? And you'll recall, Sky brought this up in his second Sky and Chance video on time, that the nature of the mind, since it doesn't exist anywhere in space, is the size and can encompass the entire universe. That is, if you're thinking about the entire universe, and if you're generating a thought object, to use Riemann's term, a Geistesmasse, to conceptualize the whole universe, then your mind is the size of the universe. And then you can say, well, what do you mean by size? And that's, I say, a very good question. Does size apply to mind?
It's like what Lynn was saying, oh no, the general staff briefing that we listened to, where Lynn was saying that man is not a species in the universe. Man is a species of the universe.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly the same thing.
But another aspect of this, this modern, shockingly like Lynn, is this idea of the sublunary soul as really the essence of dynamics. It's a perfect example of dynamics.
How do you mean that?
Well, in the sense that he's saying that these impacts and these effects don't occur, in various forms, but occur through a whole interaction through the sublunary soul. Which is what dynamics means. It's the whole, as opposed to a mechanical part-by-part interaction.
If you could ask
unless I'm reading into it.
No, I think you're right. You can ask the question, where is the negative entropy in the evolution of the biosphere? If we say, look, it's not natural selection, it's not survival of the fittest, it's not a free trade competition among species, that there is a negatively entropic directionality to the universe, to the biosphere as a whole, before man. Where is that negative entropy? It's in something like the sublunary soul. If the biosphere is, as a whole, as you're saying, is going somewhere, who's in the driver's seat? And how could you conceive of that without such a conception of the sublunary soul, or something related to that? That there's something about the universe as a whole which is developing. The substance of the universe, which is unseen and unheard, is as Lynn calls it, creativity per se. That's the unseen cause of the universe. And you say, what is the universe made of? It's made of creativity per se. So, you're feeling bad? Feeling pessimistic today? Depressed? Well, think about the whole universe. It doesn't know where it's going, but it's going someplace, and it's good. And that's what Lynn was saying. I think the point you're making, Tony, is right. Because what this defines is there's a gestalt, there's a living gestalt of the biosphere and the noosphere. Lance?
Yeah, he actually does say that right here. He says all these things are signs of life.
Yeah.
And suppose a soul in the body which experiences them. Now the thing which is really eerie that strikes me is that he says it would not be easy for the sun, destitute of suitable troops, to invade this citadel of the bowels of the earth without the cooperation of some kind of soul seated within.
Yeah.
To collude with the enemy and open the gates to him. That's so prescient about what we know now about how the electromagnetic field of the earth is generated by the dynamic of what is inside the earth, which is the rotating mantle, the molten mantle. And that protects us from the dangerous radiation from the sun and admits the good radiation from the sun. It's really the interaction, the dynamic between what's in the earth and what's generated by the sun is actually, it seems to me that's what he's getting at. It's not,
But we're not even sure the inside the Earth is that way.
Yeah, I mean, the details of that may or may not be true about the rotating mantle or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's clear that the Earth is not passively receiving something powerful and energy from the universe and splattering.
Yeah.
But that there's an active self-activation which is triggered or inspired by its relationship to the universe as a whole. And that self-activation is the way in which the Earth's secret troops are sort of mobilized to open up to the sun in this image. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, right before that, I had underlined right before that where he says, it is rather the well-known philosophers or professors of philosophy who should be blamed, as although they have it from their own Aristotle that the life of animate beings and of plants is fostered by the virtue of the sun. They do not ponder the implications that the virtue of the sun is perceived by those creatures.
Yeah. Right.
So
They're saying it's purely material. You know that Aristotelians would say. I haven't read that.
It's the sun acting on these
Yeah.
things, but he's saying, but these things they perceive the virtue of the sun.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to follow up on what I was saying, because here's where, to me, it's just so paradoxical. The point is that when I say where is it, it's you have an individual, which is a sovereign individual human being, right? And each sovereign individual has their own mind. That's why it's so hard to figure out this question. It's just mind-boggling, is how can you have a mind that's not necessarily contained within you, but which is actually part of you as an individual human being? I mean,
In a sense, I think it's hopeful because then it's not little old me.
thank God.
When we think of ourselves as it's just little old me, that's when you get depressed.
Yeah.
Because you're collapsing your identity from your actual role as a woman in the universe. Or a man in the universe, whatever you
I
happen to be.
understand.
Whatever you choose to be.
That was after
Sex change, soul change, soul train.
So let's go on. Then skeptics among us might say, well, all right, I get this aspects business, and I get this business that, what he's saying is that when two bodies in the heavens are in a 90-degree angle, then there's a great commotion on Earth. When it's 91, nothing. When it's 88, nothing.
Huh.
Well, that's like in music. What if you
Not
just
degrees.
off a little bit
That's
and
right.
it falls, it just
That's
falls
right.
apart? But
That's
you get it
exactly
right.
right.
Exactly.
That's exactly right. That's what he says at the very end there of what we were reading.
91 and 89.
Yeah.
Right? He says, that last sentence. Yet he did not tell us, even in that case, on what basis it comes about that always, when the rays of the planets meet at the Earth, the rain falls if the rays of the two planets make an angle of 60 degrees, rather than if the angle is 59 or 61. Okay, now let's move on, because it takes up the question that Margaret is bringing up of the nature of the mind. Where is the mind? And how is it that all these if these sense perceptions that we have, sight, hearing, etc., are physical, what I brought up initially, how do they get from the physical realm, the brain, and you can think of your nervous system as an extension of the physical brain. So how do they get from the physical brain into the non-physical mind? Just as Kepler was saying, all right, look, I realize, this is a little hard to take. I'm saying that when the heavenly bodies are in a certain harmonic spatial relation, harmony is not a physical thing, it's a relation. If you hear one note, there's no harmony. If you hear two notes, these are not two physical sets of vibrations. The harmony is the relation between the two. Consonant, dissonant, whatever. So how is it that the universe, in expressing a harmony such as these, then has a physical effect? So he says, this is a tough question. You're asking me to answer this, and this is a toughie. So if you turn to page 370, okay, Tony, you want to read? Loud and slow.
Okay.
The first paragraph, now one difficulty.
Okay.
Everybody have that, 370? Okay.
Now, one difficulty, which was also touched on above, but lightly, must be removed. That of the way and means of reception. For the reception by us men of the likenesses of sensible things within our souls seems something acceptable and plain. For the apertures of the pupils by which they enter
The rays.
are in the open. The eye is that which forms the likeness. The crystalline fluid is that which controls the radiant beam. The net-like covering of the optic nerve is that which receives the picture of external things. Nothing of that sort is apparent in the body of the earth. No eye is here by which the soul of the earth may see the radiations of the planets and their angles. How then will it sense the light without vision? How will it perceive or receive the angles without an instrument? There is some difficulty, I confess, but if you consider the matter more deeply, it is common to both cases. Go to page 169 of my astronomical part of optics. You will see that the old complaint about human vision as well. For although the more careful opticians and medical anatomists confess that in that passage I have at last very firmly demonstrated the way of seeing after so many fruitless attempts by others, although Francis Aquilonius, whose great work on optics came out 4 years ago, has not seen my book, and so has to no purpose erected a new, exceedingly splendid structure on the old error about the way of vision. Yet that way of seeing does not extend beyond the net-like covering where the fluids of the eyes are transparent.
He's talking about the optic nerve.
Right.
Okay.
There still remains the question, not yet settled by the natural philosophers to whom I have appealed, of how the picture of the thing which is to be seen formed according to me on the net-like covering is from there on received through the opacity of the body within the recesses of the soul. Does the soul proceed outwards to meet it? And what hangs on that? I, however, as I frankly confess, concentrate more on vision than on this perception of the angle of the rays. About that I think I am capable of some by no means inept babbling, although I am completely dumb on it.
Okay, keep going.
I could indeed, without losing the main point, evade the toil of speculation and reply to the question of what eyes.
Well, slow down. By what eyes?
By what eyes the soul of the earth sees the rays of the stars. By the same by which it saw the soldier with jagged boots, whose image it implanted in the cleft stone. However, laziness is the death of philosophy. let us live and exert ourselves.
I think that would be a good bumper sticker. Laziness is the death of philosophy. Let us live and exert ourselves.
Isn't that the quote that Planck used?
That's better than life's a
Letter
bitch and
about
then you
Kepler?
die.
I don't recall, but certainly that's the spirit by which Planck, Planck says that Tycho Brahe and Copernicus were observers, and Kepler was the creator of the new astronomy. And then, we won't read this now, because everybody will definitely, their eyes will start spinning. You can take it home and read it. Then he dives in and attempts to explain how this jump occurs from the light rays into the crystalline fluid, into the net-like covering at the end, the retina, into the brain, and how it jumps from the brain to the mind. And that's what the whole next section is about. So that's why, you see how self-conscious he is. He says, laziness is the death of philosophy. Let us live and exert ourselves. And then he goes on to exert himself, and it's a little bit, it's quite breathtaking. He's such a poet. He definitely walks in the footsteps of Plato and says that, the mind is born with certain innate ideas. And he says this is true for man in one way, but it's also true in the natural world for animals. And he says at a certain point, he talks about, the raptor, the bird of prey called the kite, right? He says the idea of a kite is innate in a young fowl, young bird. The idea of a kite is innate in a young fowl, accompanied by the sign of a calamity which it must flee. So he's saying that a young pigeon has in its soul the idea of a bird of prey which is about to devour it, without having to learn from experience this is danger. So that the idea in a pigeon of the dangerous kite and the calamity about to bestow the pigeon, unless it gets the hell out of there, exists in the soul of this little bird. So, then lastly, he talks about the way in which these aspects impact, because he does do horoscopes, and part of the way he makes money, part of the way he gets money coming in is he does these charts for what the influence were on your birthday at the moment of your birth. So therefore, what are the likelihoods of how you're going to develop and whatnot.
That's funny because, of course, he attacks the astrologers early on.
Yeah, but he does say that I will only. He says at a certain point, I think in a letter, I forget where. He says I will only do charts for learned men and women who are not superstitious and of dumb minds, something like that. I will only do a chart for an individual who loves philosophy, who's able to think above what he calls the common herd. He says this again and again and again. But he reflects on this in the last section we're going to read, in which he talks about what were the stars that influenced me when I was born, and how did I become the giant that I am today in the world of philosophy. If you go to page 377, Ryan, you take a look about a quarter of the way down. There's a sentence, yet in this my stars.
Okay, start there.
Yeah, just start there and read to the end of the paragraph.
Yet in this my stars were not Mercury as morning star in the angle of the 7th house, in quartile with Mars, but they were Copernicus, they were Tycho Brahe, without whose books of observations everything which now has been brought by me into the brightest daylight would lie buried in darkness. Not Saturn, the overlord of Mercury, but Rudolph and Matthias, each Caesar Augustus, my overlords.
These were some of the local potentates that he worked for over the years who sponsored him.
Not the lodging of the planets, Capricorn for Saturn, but Upper Austria, the home of Caesar, and the ready liberty of its nobles.
Liberality.
Liberality of its nobles, on an unusual pattern, in answer to my petition. In this the angle is not the setting angle of a horoscope, but a terrestrial corner into which by permission of the emperor my overlord I betook myself, from a court where there was too much disturbance, and in which throughout these years, turning now towards the evening of my life, I have been struggling over these harmonies and other things which I have in hand. An astrologer will seek in vain from the arrangement of the stars at my nativity the reasons for my discovery in the year 1596 of the proportions between the heavenly spheres, in the year 1604 of the way of seeing, in this year 1618 of the reasons why to each planet has fallen an eccentricity of a particular size, neither smaller nor larger. In the intervening years of my demonstration of the physics of the heavens, and of the ways in which the planets move and of their true motions, and lastly of the basis of the influentiality, which is metaphysical, of the heaven on this earth below. Those things were not due to the influence of the characteristics of the heaven on that little flame of my vital faculty which had just been lit and brought into action
at his birth,
but in part they were hidden in the innermost essence of my soul, according to the Platonic theory quoted above from Proclus, and in part they were received within by another route, through my eyes, of course. The one and only way in which the arrangement of the stars at my nativity operated was that it both polished up the little flames of talent and judgment and urged my mind on to untiring toil, as well as increasing my desire for knowledge. In short, it did not inspire my mind or any of the faculties stated here, but roused it.
Okay. So, let's take a look at this tape. So you can put this all together and put it in the context of what we're doing from the standpoint of a revolution. I mean, people probably appreciate the whole world of meteorology, the whole world of seismology, as defined in academia, is chained to the Earth and completely ignores the galactic causation of these phenomena on Earth. This is people may not have seen it. This is a short section.
Sergei Poulinets, who we featured on the website actually with respect to his work on earthquake precursors and forecasting, put out a very an interesting study relatively recently on the relationship between hurricanes, which we're experiencing now in the United States, and cosmic rays. Now, hurricanes are typical of a kind of weather phenomena which people tend to look at, similar to the seismologists and earthquakes, in a very terrestrial manner. Now, contrary to this, and again, getting off the Earth, Poulinets looked at the relationship between cosmic rays, galactic cosmic rays, and hurricanes. Now, what he did, it hinges upon a recent results of a recent study, which we actually have a video on the website done by Ouyang Tang, which highlights this study called the Cloud Study, done at CERN, where they showed and really confirmed something that the Danish scientist Henrik Svensmark had asserted, which is that galactic cosmic rays play a significant role in catalyzing cloud formation. And what this cloud experiment showed was it at least confirmed that really does seem to be the case. Now, the study that Poulenetz did with respect to hurricanes and cosmic rays hinged on this, and he focused on a case study which is very relevant and I think resonates with the American people, that of Hurricane Katrina, a very destructive Category 5 hurricane that we experienced a couple years ago. Now, virtually concurrent with Hurricane Katrina, you had a serious geomagnetic storm. Now, this is catalyzed by solar activity. We don't know the causes we don't necessarily know the causes of that. Related to what's going on in the sun, catalyzed a geomagnetic storm here on Earth, which generally, and in this specific case, served to deflect, actually, galactic cosmic rays, which otherwise would have intercepted the Earth. So you had a certain cutting off, actually, of a relationship between the Earth and the galaxy with this geomagnetic storm. So deflection of the cosmic rays, which serve as the basis for cloud formation. Now, what Poulenetz asserted was what you had was a decrease of this cosmic ray-induced cloud formation, fewer cloud condensation nuclei, which in a sense were catalyzed by the cosmic rays, and less condensation around those nuclei, forming clouds. Now, what you typically have with that condensation is a release of heat with the cosmic ray-induced cloud formation. With this deflection of the galactic cosmic rays, you had less of that. You had less of a releasing of this heat and a cooling of the upper atmosphere. Now, through a series of other things, this overall cooling of the upper atmosphere, Poulenetz said, caused an increase in convection and ultimately an increasing of the intensity of this hurricane, which became a Category 5. It was a direct relationship to the galactic cosmic radiation, and in a sense, the intensification of the hurricane, as he goes through this case, was caused by a certain severing of a galactic relationship, of a relationship between the Earth and the galaxy, through the deflection of this cosmic radiation. So it's a provocative case. It's a clear relationship between local weather phenomena similar to what we're experiencing now on the East Coast, in the Gulf, and something at the scale of the galaxy.
Concurrent with the hurricanes brewing in the Atlantic, we are seeing the expression.
The cosmic nature of weather, or
The
cosmic
cosmic forces,
It's one of the main things.
cosmic forces of weather.
Yeah, the cosmic forces of weather, question mark. It's about 5 days ago. Okay, that's it.